are watching history unfold.
Google.
And today, we're going to make sense of the chaos together. Today is Saturday, March 7th, 2026.
Right.
The world as you knew it has changed dramatically. I mean, fundamentally and violently in exactly 8 days.
Yeah, just 8 days.
I want you to just pause for a second and think about where you were last Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the mundane things you were doing, the plans you were making.
Yeah.
Because the reality we are all waking up to today is it's almost unrecognizable from that moment.
It really is. The word unprecedented gets, thrown around so casually in geopolitical analysis.
Oh, constantly.
Right. But the scope and the speed of what has transpired over these last 8 days, it truly tests the limits of our vocabulary.
Yeah.
Conflicts of this scale involving multiple sovereign nations, advanced military technology, massive economic collateral damage.
Yeah.
They don't happen in a vacuum.
No, they don't.
To truly understand the gravity of the last week, we can't just look at the explosions. We have to look at the micro details, the specific targeted military strikes, the naval engagements, the weapons systems deployed.
The immediate casualties.
Exactly, the casualties. But simultaneously, we have to pull back and look at the macro consequences. We're talking about immediate global economic shocks, the total disruption of international shipping lanes, and this is huge, the rewriting of diplomatic alliances in real time.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive.
Right.
We have taken a massive stack of the most recent verified reporting, official military statements, and geopolitical analyses regarding the rapidly unfolding 2026 Iran-U.S.-Israel war. And we are distilling it all down for you.
Cutting through the noise.
Cutting through the absolute noise, because your phone has likely been buzzing nonstop with breaking news alerts, conflicting reports.
Unavented updates everywhere.
Exactly. We want to give you a clear, comprehensive, and strictly factual understanding of how we got here, what is happening right this very second, and what it means for the entire globe.
And we should be clear from the top.
Yes, very clear. We aren't here to take political sides.
No.
Nor are we here to endorse or condemn any government's actions.
We're just looking at the source material.
Right. Our singular focus is to report the facts of the source material impartially, so you can be fully informed. So let's trace the steps.
Let's do it.
Before we look at the sheer destruction of this week, we need to understand the fuse that was lit over the last 3 years. How exactly did we arrive at the precipice on February 28th?
Well, to understand February 28th, we really have to rewind to 2023.
Okay.
The Middle Eastern crisis that began that year established a grim new baseline for regional instability. But the true escalation, the shift from shadow wars and proxy battles to direct kinetic conflict between state actors that really ramped up over the last 2 years.
Because we saw direct missile exchanges between Israel and Iran in 2024.
We did, and that was a major psychological barrier being broken. But the situation severely escalated in June of 2025.
With the 12-day war.
With what became known as the 12-day war.
I want to pause on that June 2025 conflict, because the 12-day war wasn't just another localized skirmish.
No, it wasn't.
The source material highlights that this involved direct United States intervention. The U.S. executed an airstrike directly on Iran's nuclear facilities.
Yes.
That feels like a massive Rubicon to cross.
It was the literal definition of crossing the Rubicon.
Yeah.
You have to consider what a nuclear program represents to a nation-state,
Right.
particularly one that has structured its entire defense posture around deterring foreign intervention. To the Iranian government, that program is considered essential to their national sovereignty.
And long-term survival.
Exactly. So when a foreign power directly bombs the infrastructure of that program, the diplomatic pathways narrow incredibly fast.
You're no longer negotiating over sanctions relief.
Right, or trade embargoes. You are engaging in direct military action against a core state asset. The physical hardening of those nuclear sites means that any strike requires specialized heavy munitions.
Bunker buster.
Yes. It is a loud, unmistakable declaration of military intent.
But the tension wasn't just building from the outside. The reporting we have paints a picture of a country that was simultaneously fracturing from the inside.
Crucial context.
Let's look at January of 2026. Just 2 months ago, Iran experienced the largest domestic protests since the Islamic Revolution.
And the response was brutal.
According to the numbers, it was devastating. We're talking about thousands of protesters killed by their own government security apparatus.
The intersection of domestic vulnerability and foreign policy is a crucial dynamic here. When a government faces an existential internal threat, and make no mistake, protests of a scale that require the killing of thousands of citizens to suppress.
That is an existential threat.
It absolutely is. When they face that, they become incredibly volatile. Historically, we see a classic geopolitical trap occur in these moments.
How so?
The internal pressure on the Iranian government from those deadly January protests collided head-on with the external pressures of a hostile international community. In an attempt to project strength outward when they are at their weakest inward, nations often take hardline, inflexible diplomatic stances.
They overcompensate.
Right. They cannot afford to look weak at the negotiating table when they are fighting for survival in their own streets.
I can't wrap my head around the timeline that followed, though, because that brings us to the absolute whiplash of late February 2026.
The Geneva talks.
Yes. If you look at the news cycle from Wednesday, February 25th, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi publicly claimed that a historic agreement with the United States to avert military conflict was within reach.
Within reach.
They were heading into renewed indirect nuclear negotiations in Geneva. Why would a seasoned diplomat use the phrase historic agreement within reach if the reality on the ground was barreling toward war?
Well, in diplomacy, within reach can sometimes be the most dangerous phrase a negotiator can utter.
Because of the expectations.
Exactly. It sets an expectation of imminent resolution. Sometimes it's used as a pressure tactic to force the other side's hand, and sometimes it's a genuine miscalculation of how close the parties actually are.
But when it falls apart,
The collapse of that hope creates an immediate, severe backlash. When you publicly build the expectation of a historic peace, and then the talks spectacularly collapse, which the Geneva talks did almost immediately, the resulting vacuum is quickly filled by the most hawkish elements on both sides.
and the United States' reaction to that collapse in Geneva was immediate and
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
It wasn't a pause. It wasn't a recall of ambassadors. It was the mobilization of the largest military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq.
That speed of mobilization indicates that the military contingency plans were not just drawn up, they were already primed.
Ready to go.
Moving the logistical tail required for a buildup of that magnitude, aircraft carrier strike groups, strategic bomber deployments, air defense batteries,
Fuel, munitions.
all of it. It takes immense coordination. The fact that it happened almost synchronously with the collapse of the Geneva talks tells us that the U.S. administration had already decided that the diplomatic window was effectively closed.
So, for you, the listener, I want you to feel that compressed timeline. Imagine reading on a Wednesday that a historic peace agreement to avert a regional war is within reach.
You might feel a brief moment of relief.
Right. And then, by Saturday, the largest military mobilization in over 2 decades is locking into place. The psychological whiplash is staggering. And that massive powder keg, aggressively packed over 3 years and accelerated into overdrive over 3 days, finally ignited in the early hours of February 28th.
And it ignited with a coordinated, overwhelming use of force across multiple domains simultaneously.
Let's look at the spark. February 28th, 2026. Israel and the United States launched coordinated joint attacks on sites across Iran.
Yes.
The code names for these operations are documented as Operation Roaring Lion for Israel's offensive and Operation Epic Fury for the United States.
Military code names are often designed to project overwhelming, unstoppable force, both to the domestic populace and the adversary.
Sure.
But looking past the nomenclature, the target list is what truly reveals the nature and ambition of this operation. These were joint airstrikes against military and government sites, but the geography of the strikes is telling.
They struck Tehran,
The political capital,
Isfahan,
a major industrial and nuclear hub,
Qom.
which is the religious center of the country.
They also targeted Karaj and Kermanshah.
Right.
The spread of those cities is vital to understand. This wasn't a limited border skirmish or a surgical strike on a remote desert launch pad.
No.
Hitting Tehran, Isfahan, and Qom simultaneously is striking at the political, industrial, and religious heart of the Iranian state all at once.
Precisely. You are hitting the command and control nodes, the production facilities, and the ideological centers of gravity. But the military execution of these strikes was arguably matched in its shock value by how the operation was communicated to the world.
The communication strategy is something we have to highlight because it defines the modern reality of warfare.
It really does.
At exactly 2:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on February 28th, Donald Trump released an 8-minute video statement. But he didn't do it from the Oval Office with a traditional press pool.
Or through a scheduled national broadcast.
No. He dropped it on Truth Social in the middle of the night. This is how war is declared in 2026. straight to a social media platform, bypassing all traditional channels, instantly changing the geopolitical landscape while half the world is sleeping.
The medium is part of the message here. Releasing an 8-minute video directly to social media at 2:30 in the morning creates an immediate, unfiltered narrative.
Before anyone can even process it.
Exactly. It preempts any journalistic analysis or immediate counter-narratives. In that video, the justification provided for the strikes was broad and expansive,
He cited Iran's menacing activities.
and specifically listed a hostage crisis, their long-standing support for regional proxy groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, the recent killings of the domestic protesters we just discussed, and their alleged pursuit of nuclear weapons.
But the most shocking part of that 2:30 a.m. video wasn't just the laundry list of justifications.
No, it was the explicitly stated goal.
Trump said the purpose of the U.S. strikes was regime change. Furthermore, he directly urged members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, to lay down their weapons or face certain death.
We need to analyze the weight of that phrase, regime change.
Right.
Historically, military operations of this scale heavily rely on euphemisms. Administrations will talk about degrading enemy capabilities or restoring regional deterrence or protecting vital national security interests.
Standard political speak.
Right. Stating outright that the primary goal is regime change and demanding that the military apparatus of a sovereign nation face certain death if they do not surrender,
It changes everything.
it fundamentally and irreversibly alters the stakes of the conflict.
I want to push on that. For someone trying to understand the diplomatic weight of those words, why is saying regime change out loud so consequential? Doesn't everyone usually know that's the unspoken goal anyway?
It is consequential because it completely removes the off-ramp.
The off-ramp.
Yes. If a nation says, we are bombing you to stop you from building a specific weapons facility, the conflict can theoretically end when that facility is verified as destroyed, or a new diplomatic agreement is reached.
The government survives.
The survival of the governing regime is still on the table. But if the stated public goal is the total removal of the government fighting you has absolutely nothing left to lose.
It's all or nothing.
It transforms a conflict over policy or capabilities into a zero-sum game of absolute survival. It practically guarantees that the adversary will fight with every single asset they have, regardless of the cost to their own infrastructure or populace.
Because surrender means institutional and personal extinction.
Exactly. And as the reporting from day one shows, the goal of regime change wasn't just rhetorical bluster. It was brutally and immediately executed.
It was. Which brings us to one of the most consequential moments of the last week, the decapitation strike. On that very first day, February 28th, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, was assassinated in the strikes.
The magnitude of this specific event cannot be overstated. In Iran's theocratic system, the supreme leader is not analogous to a president or a prime minister in a Western democracy.
He's not just a politician.
He is the ultimate political, military, and religious authority. He is the commander-in-chief of all armed forces. He holds absolute, unchecked authority over the state apparatus.
So eliminating him.
Eliminating the supreme leader creates an instant massive power vacuum at the very top of a highly centralized authoritarian system.
And the devastation extended far beyond just the supreme leader himself. The collateral damage to his family, as documented by Iranian state media, is profound.
It is.
Early on March 1st, state media confirmed Khamenei's death. But then the Fars news agency, which is important to note, is controlled by the IRGC, so this is an official regime mouthpiece.
Right.
They announced that Khamenei's daughter, his son-in-law, his grandchild, and his daughter-in-law were all killed in the strikes.
Awful.
The following day, March 2nd, it was confirmed that his wife, Mansoura Khujasta Bagherzadeh, also died from injuries sustained in the strike. The entire immediate family wiped out in essentially a single kinetic event.
When we analyze this from a structural and psychological perspective, the impact on the Iranian state is seismic. We just discussed the domestic protests in January that required brutal suppression.
Right.
The regime was already fracturing under immense internal economic and social pressure. Now, the absolute pinnacle of their hierarchy, a figure who has ruled for decades and around whom the entire power structure is oriented, is suddenly gone, along with his entire family.
The psychological shock.
To the Iranian populace, and specifically to the regime loyalists and the internal security forces, it is immeasurable.
I want to put this directly to you, the listener. Imagine the structure of a massive organization you work for or a government you live under. If you are the remaining Iranian military apparatus, the surviving generals of the IRGC, how do you even begin to respond to the total decapitation of your leadership?
Right.
How does command and control function when the absolute top of the pyramid is vaporized overnight?
It immediately leads to intense speculation about fragmentation. In the absence of the supreme leader, do the surviving IRGC commanders manage to unify under a hastily appointed successor, or do they fracture into regional competing commands?
Which would be chaos.
Complete chaos.
Yeah.
In the immediate aftermath of a decapitation strike, survival instinct and a deeply ingrained mandate for retaliation almost always override coordinated long-term strategic planning.
You don't convene a committee.
You don't convene a committee to discuss a measured response. You unleash whatever you have left before it gets destroyed. And the retaliation we saw indicates a massive, furious unleashing of their remaining arsenal.
The answer from the remaining Iranian military came from the skies. Let's look at the retaliation. They named it Operation True Promise the Fourth.
True Promise 4.
And the sheer scale of this response is difficult to grasp. According to a military source speaking to the Fars news agency on March 5th, Iran fired over 500 ballistic and naval missiles and almost 2,000 drones starting on February 28th.
2,000 drones and 500 missiles launched within a matter of days. That is the definition of a saturation attack.
A saturation attack.
The goal of a saturation attack isn't necessarily precision, it is volume. It is designed to completely overwhelm advanced air defense systems like the U.S. Patriot batteries or Israel's Iron Dome and David slings.
Just sheer numbers.
Yes, even if an air defense system has a 95% interception rate, when you fire 2,500 projectiles, the 5% that get through will cause devastating damage. But what is truly crucial to analyze here is the targeting split.
Geographical split.
Right. According to the data, roughly 40% of those launches were aimed at Israel, but the majority, almost 60%, were fired at U.S. targets across the entire region. We are talking about inbound projectiles over Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates.
They effectively blanketed the entire Persian Gulf region with drone swarms and ballistic missiles.
They did.
But this is where the strategy shifts in a way that is incredibly alarming for global stability. They didn't just target military bases or command centers. There was a hard, deliberate shift to civilian and economic targets.
This is key.
The reporting shows Iran targeted luxury hotels and high-rise apartments in the UAE, specifically striking places believed to house U.S. personnel.
This represents a massive, calculated escalation in the rules of engagement. By targeting luxury infrastructure and commercial centers in the UAE, Iran's surviving command structure is sending a very specific, undeniable message.
What's the message?
They are sharply contrasting this response with previous, more contained retaliations we've seen over the past decade, which usually focus strictly on military outposts in isolated areas of Iraq or Syria. Targeting major global economic and transit hubs is a deliberate strategy to inflict maximum economic pain, not just on the U.S. military, but on U.S. allies and the global market.
You have likely seen the terrifying imagery flooding social media, swarms of drones hitting these glittering, ultra-modern high-rises in Dubai. The reports detail that Dubai International Airport, which is routinely one of the busiest global transit hubs on Earth, had a concourse completely filled with smoke.
Shutting it down.
The attacks effectively shut down major aviation hubs. The Burj Al Arab Hotel, one of the most recognizable, iconic luxury buildings in the world, was physically damaged.
Unbelievable.
I want you to truly imagine that scenario. You are a civilian, perhaps traveling for business or taking a vacation, connecting through Dubai, which is generally considered one of the safest, most secure transit hubs in the world. And suddenly, without warning, it is an active war zone with drones falling from the sky into luxury hotels.
The profound psychological impact of that scenario is exactly what Iran's remaining military commanders are counting on. It shatters the illusion of safety and stability in the Gulf.
Right.
The geopolitical message being broadcast is, nowhere in the Gulf is safe. If our capital is burning, your economic centers will burn too. It is a calculated, desperate move to force the wealthy Gulf states to pressure the United States to back down by making the economic and social cost of hosting U.S. personnel completely unbearable.
Wait, but if they target luxury hotels and airports in the UAE, doesn't that backfire? Doesn't that just guarantee that the UAE fully aligns with the U.S. out of pure self-defense and allows the U.S. to use their bases indefinitely to strike back?
It's a high-risk gamble, absolutely.
Eh.
But from the perspective of a decapitated regime fighting for its literal survival, the logic shifts. They may calculate that the UAE leadership values its reputation as a safe, stable haven for global capital more than it values its defense alignment with Washington.
Ah.
If foreign investment flees Dubai because it's deemed a war zone, the economic foundation of the UAE crumbles.
Mm-hmm.
Iran is betting that the threat of economic ruin will force the Gulf states to push Washington for a ceasefire.
While Iran was filling the Gulf skies with drones in the saturation attack, the U.S. and Israel were executing a multi-front, high-tech military campaign of their own that was setting astonishing historical precedents.
The scale is wild.
Let's look at the raw mechanics of this escalation. According to U.S. Central Command, the United States struck over 3,000 targets inside Iran in just the first week. 3,000 targets in 7 days.
To put that into perspective, that volume of sorties and missile strikes requires a logistical supply chain that is almost unfathomable to anyone outside of military planning. It means round-the-clock, relentless operations from every available asset in the theater. It means aerial refueling tankers operating constantly, ordnance crews loading jets 24 hours a day, and intelligence analysts rapidly identifying and verifying new targets in real time.
It's a massive machine.
But beyond the staggering air campaign, we saw a specific engagement on March 4th that truly highlights the immense geographic spread of this war.
This naval engagement is one of those distinct historical moments that just stops you in your tracks when you read the reports. On March 4th, a U.S. Navy submarine sank the Iranian Navy frigate, the Iris Dana.
Yes.
But the location of this sinking is what is wild. It didn't happen in the cramped waters of the Persian Gulf. It happened deep in the Indian Ocean, approximately 40 nautical miles south of Galé, Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka.
If you look at a map and trace the distance from the Iranian coastline or the Persian Gulf all the way down to the southern coast of Sri Lanka, the distance is immense. What is fascinating here is that this specific engagement proves this is a true blue water naval war.
Hold on, you mentioned a blue water naval war. For those of us who don't spend our weekends reading naval strategy textbooks, what distinguishes a blue water navy from what Iran normally does?
A brown water or green water navy operates in coastal areas, rivers, and littoral zones, like the fast attack speedboats Iran usually uses to harass shipping in the Strait of Hormuz.
The little swarm boats.
Exactly. A blue water navy has the maritime capability to operate across the deep oceans, globally. The fact that an Iranian frigate was operating off the coast of Sri Lanka shows they were attempting to project naval power far outward, or perhaps desperately trying to move high-value assets out of the immediate danger zone of the Gulf.
And the U.S. found them.
And the fact that the U.S. Navy tracked them across the ocean and eliminated them thousands of miles away demonstrates the terrifying reach of U.S. submarine capabilities.
And the historical context of this sinking is just staggering. The source material notes this was the first ship sunk by a submarine in active combat since the Falklands War in 1982.
When a British sub sank an Argentine cruiser?
Right. Furthermore, it is the first ship sunk by an American submarine in combat since World War II.
World War II.
Think about that. You have to go all the way back in the 1940s to find a precedent for what the U.S. Navy executed this week. That underscores the completely unprecedented nature of this specific escalation.
It also highlights the absolute lethality of modern submarine warfare. We're not talking about World War II-era unguided torpedoes.
Wow.
When a modern, wire-guided heavyweight torpedo strikes a frigate, it doesn't just poke a hole in the side.
No.
It often detonates directly beneath the keel, literally breaking the ship in half. The destruction is absolute, instantaneous, and catastrophic for the crew.
While the U.S. military is projecting this unprecedented high-tech power thousands of miles away in the Indian Ocean, the political reality back in Washington is proving to be incredibly complex, and it's actively shaping the execution of this war.
Domestic politics always does.
Let's unpack the domestic side. The Trump administration bypassed Congress, declaring a national emergency to immediately sell 12,000 bombs to Israel. This was a massive arms package valued at over $151 million.
Bypassing Congress using emergency declarations for foreign arms sales has a historical precedent, but the scale of the munitions and the timing here are the critical factors.
Because it's week one.
Exactly. It shows an executive branch determined to rapidly resupply an ally engaged in a multi-front war without waiting for what can be a slow, contentious legislative debate. And predictably, the legislative branch reacted to being bypassed.
They absolutely did. We saw a Senate War Powers resolution immediately introduced. This was a Democratic push to officially rebuke the president and constitutionally block further military force against Iran.
Right.
The resolution was put to a floor vote, and it was defeated, but the margin was incredibly close. The final vote was 47 to 53.
If we connect this Senate vote to the bigger geopolitical picture, a 47-53 vote during the opening days of a massive international conflict is incredibly revealing. It exposes a deeply divided domestic political front in the United States.
Break down the middle.
The War Powers Act is a perennial point of constitutional tension between the powers of the president as commander-in-chief and the power of Congress to declare war. But when 47 sitting senators vote to legally block further military force just days into a war of this sheer magnitude, it sends a powerful signal to adversaries.
What kind of signal? That the U.S. won't have the stamina for a long fight.
Exactly. Adversaries, particularly state actors like Iran or Russia, watch these domestic legislative votes obsessively. They're calculating the American political will.
They're doing the math.
They're asking themselves, can the U.S. administration sustain a long, drawn-out, costly conflict if nearly half of the United States Senate is actively trying to pull the plug on week one? It encourages adversaries to drag the conflict out, hoping that domestic political pressure in Washington will force an eventual American withdrawal or concession.
And while Washington is locked in these fierce debates, Israel is fighting a massive war on multiple fronts. In parallel to the joint strikes on Iran, the source material notes Israel launched fresh waves of heavy attacks on Lebanon.
All up front.
The United Nations is already issuing dire warnings that hundreds of thousands of people have been affected by widespread displacement orders there. The UN stated that the conditions being created risk constituting prohibited forced displacement under international law.
Which means we are no longer looking at just a bilateral U.S.-Iran war, or even a trilateral U.S.-Israel-Iran war.
It's regional.
The entire Levant, the Persian Gulf, and now parts of the Indian Ocean are actively engaged in combat or suffering massive immediate collateral damage. The conflict has metastasized beyond its original borders in just 8 days.
That reality is the perfect pivot to the most sobering part of our deep dive. We've talked extensively about the military hardware, the historical submarine strikes, the drone swarms, and the political maneuvering in the Senate.
The mechanics of it.
But what does this actually mean for the human beings caught in the middle of it? Let's talk about the absolute devastating fallout of the last 8 days. The casualties, the stranded civilians, and the massive shocks to global markets.
The human cost is always the most immediate, tragic, and enduring metric of any war. And the numbers emerging from just this first week are staggering and deeply unsettling.
Let's start with the military casualties. The official reports confirm 6 U.S. military deaths in the first week. These fatalities occurred during an Iranian strike on a U.S. command center located in Kuwait.
Right.
On the other side, it is reported that more than 1,200 Iranians have been killed in the initial U.S.-Israeli joint attacks. But as is always the case in modern warfare, it's the civilian toll that is escalating most rapidly and horrifically.
In any conflict involving over 3,000 airstrikes conducted in urban and semi-urban environments over a 7-day period, the civilian infrastructure is going to suffer immensely.
It's unavoidable.
The kinetic reality of dropping heavy munitions on cities like Tehran and Isfahan means that regardless of the precision of the guidance systems, the collateral damage to surrounding civilian areas will be catastrophic.
The numbers coming from aid organizations reflect that devastation. The Iranian Red Crescent Society reported that over 6,668 civilian units were targeted or destroyed by U.S.-Israeli strikes by March 7th. That number includes residential areas, businesses, and essential infrastructure.
Just flagged.
And then there is a highly specific, tragic strike reported by Iranian state media. They report an airstrike killed 180 people and noted that the victims were mostly school children. The Iranian government has officially labeled this a war crime.
Right.
And again, as we stated at the beginning, we are reporting the claims, figures, and accusations exactly as they appear in the source material, without endorsing or validating them, but simply to convey the grim reality of the information war and the reported tragedy on the ground.
And we must recognize that the information war is a crucial, active component of the physical war. Accusations of war crimes, particularly those involving mass casualties of children, are powerfully utilized by state apparatuses to rally domestic outrage.
To build support.
To solidify internal support and demand international condemnation of their adversaries. Regardless of the tactical realities, the fog of war, or the specific target of that strike, the narrative impact is immediate. It hardens the resolve of the surviving populace, fuels recruitment for retaliation, and deeply complicates any future attempts at diplomatic intervention by neutral third parties.
And the intense suffering isn't just limited to those directly under the bombs. Let's talk about the people who are just geographically trapped by the sudden outbreak of war.
The stranded populations.
According to data from the UN's International Maritime Organization, there are currently about 20,000 commercial seafarers and roughly 15,000 cruise ship passengers stranded in the Persian Gulf.
This specific situation raises a vital point about the collateral damage to the global commons. The Persian Gulf is one of the most vital, congested, and economically critical waterways on the entire planet.
It's a massive choke point.
When a shooting war erupts, with drone swarms and naval engagements occurring in the shipping lanes, the maritime industry paralyzes. Commercial maritime insurance premiums instantly skyrocket to unsustainable levels. Or underwriters pull coverage entirely, meaning ships legally cannot move. Port authorities freeze all movement to prevent mass casualties in their harbors.
I want to slow down and really think about the human element of that. Imagine you are on a civilian cruise ship. You saved up for a vacation, you are floating in the Gulf, and suddenly the airspace is closed. The ports are locked down.
And insurance companies have literally abandoned the vessel.
You essentially have 35,000 civilians sitting on massive, floating targets in an active, highly lethal war zone. They are unable to dock, they are unable to sail to international waters, and they are rapidly depleting their onboard supplies of food, water, and medicine.
It's under.
It's like being stuck on an airplane on the tarmac for hours, but stretch that anxiety and physical confinement across a week in a war zone.
That is a terrifyingly apt analogy.
Mm.
The logistical nightmare of trying to resupply or evacuate 35,000 civilians by sea while anti-ship missiles and drones are actively traversing the airspace above them, it is nearly impossible to solve without a formal cessation of hostilities.
I want to connect us directly back to you, listening right now. You might feel like this war is happening thousands of miles away. It might feel like an abstract geopolitical event happening on a screen, detached from your daily life.
But it's not.
But when you have 35,000 civilians trapped on commercial ships and major global transit hubs shutting down operations, the economic shockwaves do not respect borders. They are going to hit your wallet, your retirement investments, and the price at your local gas station almost instantly.
Absolutely. The economic fallout is where the macro consequences of this war become intensely personal and unavoidable for everyone on the globe. We are already seeing immediate dramatic surges in global oil and gas prices.
At the pump.
There are widespread, cascading disruptions in international aviation and global tourism. Global stock markets are experiencing sharp declines and wild, unpredictable volatility as investors panic. Financial analysts are already adjusting their models, projecting potential massive global inflation increases and warning of severe risks of a global economic recession if these supply chain disruptions persist for even a few more weeks.
And a massive, undeniable part of that recession risk is tied directly to the energy sector. We saw gas prices spike sharply this week. Why? Because Qatar Energy made a massive announcement.
The LNG halt.
They stated they are halting all gas production following strikes that hit their main facilities. Qatar is a colossal supplier of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG. When their facilities go offline, it isn't a localized problem. The global supply of energy shrinks dramatically and instantaneously.
And that leads us to what economists consider the ultimate nightmare scenario for the global market, the potential physical closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's total oil consumption passes through that narrow, highly vulnerable maritime choke point.
20%.
If Iran decides to aggressively mine the strait, or if the sheer volume of drone and missile strikes simply makes it too dangerous for massive, slow-moving commercial tankers to navigate, the resulting energy shock will be catastrophic.
Worse than the 70s.
It would likely make the infamous 1970s oil crisis look mild by comparison. Entire industries in Europe and Asia that rely on LNG imports to literally keep the lights on, and factories running would face immediate shortages.
So as the Middle East burns, as millions face displacement, and as Western markets panic over energy shortages, we have to ask, who is benefiting from this chaos?
Always a crucial question.
Because in geopolitics, a power vacuum is always inevitably filled by someone. The reports note a major, highly strategic shift happening right now with Russia.
Yes.
The Kremlin officially reported a significant increase in demand for Russian energy resources as a direct, immediate result of this conflict. And they have publicly confirmed they are in active, ongoing dialogue with Iran.
This is a masterclass in strategic opportunism and what we call energy statecraft. As Western sanctions and the physical destruction of pipelines and facilities knock Middle Eastern energy offline, Russia eagerly steps in to fill the massive void in the market,
Cashing in.
heavily profiting from the massive price surges caused by the war. Furthermore, actively engaging in public, high-level dialogue with Iran while the United States is actively at war with them is a powerful diplomatic signal.
What does it signal?
It signals the deepening of an anti-Western geopolitical axis. Russia gets to position itself as the reliable, alternative partner for energy, security, and trade, all while the United States is bogged down in a massive, incredibly costly regional war.
Which brings us to the present moment. After all this destruction, all these shifts in power, where exactly do we stand today on Saturday, March 7th, 2026?
We stand on a terrifying knife's edge. The United Nations has issued a dire, stark warning that the wider Middle East conflict could spiral completely out of control, pulling in further regional actors. And amidst this violence, we are seeing some fascinating, incredibly high-wire diplomatic posturing happening in real time.
Let's look closely at what Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian is doing right now. He announced a major strategic pivot in the last 24 hours. He stated publicly that neighboring countries will no longer be targeted by Iranian strikes unless an attack specifically originates from their territory.
This is huge.
This is effectively an unprecedented public apology for the drone strikes on the UAE and other Gulf states.
It is a profound, incredibly rare admission of strategic reality from the Iranian leadership. Pezeshkian is desperately attempting to de-escalate tensions with the wealthy Gulf states.
Why now?
Because the Iranian leadership, or whatever command structure remains intact, likely realizes the cold, hard math. They simply cannot sustain a war against the United States, Israel, and all of their heavily armed Arab neighbors simultaneously.
They need to peel someone off.
By stating, "We won't hit your cities unless you allow the U.S. to launch bombers from your soil," he is actively trying to fracture the United States' alliance network in the region. He is putting the onus and the immense pressure directly on the leadership of the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia to legally or practically restrict U.S. military operations, lest they invite more devastating drone strikes on their luxury hotels and airports.
It's an incredibly calculated diplomatic tightrope. But while Iran is trying to frantically soothe its neighbors and isolate the U.S. regionally, there is absolutely zero de-escalation happening with Washington. President Trump has issued a maximalist, uncompromising demand. He is publicly calling for Iran's unconditional surrender.
And here we circle all the way back to the problem of absolute rhetoric that we discussed regarding his initial regime change statement. Unconditional surrender is a heavy, loaded historical term. It evokes the end of World War II with Germany and Japan. It leaves absolutely zero room for negotiation, no space for ceasefire, and no possibility of a mediated settlement. It means the complete, total capitulation and the legal dissolution of the existing state apparatus.
And President Pezeshkian's response to that demand for unconditional surrender was fiercely defiant. He said, and I quote from the reports, that "we surrender unconditionally is a dream that they must take with themselves to the grave."
When one side publicly demands unconditional surrender, and the opposing side publicly promises to fight them to the grave, the diplomatic off-ramp doesn't just narrow, it ceases to exist entirely.
There's nowhere to go.
There is no middle ground between surrender and the grave. It practically guarantees that the kinetic military action, the bombings, the drone strikes, and the naval warfare will continue unabated until one side is physically incapable of fielding a fighting force.
Which is exactly what is being promised in the source material we're looking at today. Trump has publicly previewed a heavy new assault scheduled to take place today, Saturday. He posted on social media, "Today, Iran will be hit very hard." So as we sit here and record this deep dive, the conflict is fiercely signaling that it is far from over as it drags into its second week.
And the grim military calculus for military planners right now is what targets are even left to hit. After launching 3,000 strikes in week one, decimating leadership, military bases, and industrial hubs, a heavy new assault implies a deeply concerning escalation.
What does that look like?
It means either a deepening of the target list into increasingly civilian or dual-use infrastructure, power grids, water treatment plants, civilian telecommunications, or the potential introduction of ground forces, though that remains highly speculative at this moment.
So what does this all mean for the future? Let's take a deep breath and recap the staggering, almost unbelievable reality of what we have discussed today. In just 8 short days, the world has witnessed the total, violent decapitation of Iran's supreme leadership and immediate family.
Yes.
We have seen historical naval warfare, with an American submarine sinking an Iranian ship deep in the Indian Ocean for the first time since World War II. We've seen thousands of drones and ballistic missiles fired across the region, striking global tourist hubs, shutting down international airports, and halting major global energy production in Qatar.
The sheer velocity of this conflict is its defining characteristic. The diplomatic guardrails, the economic interdependencies, and the strategic deterrence that kept the 2023 to 2025 tensions from boiling over into total war have completely and utterly disintegrated in less than 200 hours.
We've talked extensively about the bombs, the complex domestic politics, the immediate and severe economic shocks, the human tragedy of stranded civilians and lost lives, and the historical precedents being set. But we want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over as you watch the news continue to break this weekend.
Consider pulling on this specific thread. If Iran is now actively, publicly communicating with Russia, and successfully managing to diplomatically apologize and attempt to de-escalate with its Gulf neighbors like the UAE, all while the United States demands unconditional surrender and readies a new heavy assault.
Are we watching a realignment?
Are we currently watching the violent birth of a completely new global alliance structure? Think about the long-term implications. Even if the shooting miraculously stops tomorrow, has the map of who relies on whom for energy, for military security, and for economic partnership been permanently redrawn in just 8 days.
Wow.
The immediate physical destruction of this war is horrific, but the geopolitical realignment happening right now in the shadows of these airstrikes might just be its most enduring, world-altering legacy.
It is a massive amount of heavy, complex information to process, and it is a rapidly evolving, highly volatile situation. The casualty figures, the assessments of territorial and infrastructure damage, and the rigid diplomatic positions are literally changing by the hour.
By the minute, sometimes.
We highly recommend you continue to follow live, verified coverage from established international outlets like the BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, and NPR. Thank you for taking the time to join us on this deep dive into the source material. We know the subject matter is heavy and distressing, but understanding the verified facts is the crucial first step to making sense of a world that feels like it's spinning out of control. Keep paying close attention to the details, always question the narratives you read, look deeply for the verifiable facts, and never ever stop learning. Stay safe out there.